Welcome to the Progress Texas Happy Hour.
Welcome back to the Progress Texas Happy Hour. I'm Executive Director Kathleen Thompson. Progress Texas amplifies progressive leaders, values, and actions. Our digital, podcast, and radio networks reach millions monthly with smart, hard-hitting coverage. As the #1 progressive pod in Texas and in the top 2% of all podcasts globally, we make Texas politics easy to understand and participate in during this crucial midterm year. Are y'all ready to vote? I am. What kind of leader do you want representing you? And what are your top issues? Why are you voting? Those are just some of the questions that members of the Texas Legislative Progressive Caucus are asking folks all around the state during their People's Hearings Tour this summer. They're ready to listen and take that information back to our legislature and put those public policies to work. The TLPC was established in 2021, and since then has grown alongside our state's massive wave of support for progressive representation. They've led the fight for forward-thinking legislation that puts working families first in our state legislature. And now they want to hear from you. Today we have 2 TLPC members who have specifically joined us to tell you all about it. Thank you for making a pit stop with us, State Representatives John Bryant and Vince Perez.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you both. Representative John Bryant has decades of experience that include 7 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives and 7 terms in the Texas House of Representatives, including a hiatus, if you will. He returned to duty in 2022 and has been named one of Texas's 10 best legislators by Texas Monthly 3 times, and he's a former U.S. ambassador. Our other special guest today is State Representative Vince Perez, who represents Texas's House District 77 in El Paso, and he was the only member of the Texas Legislative Progressive Caucus from anywhere west of San Antonio. When the House Dems broke quorum last August over the redistricting map, he was the only member from that stretch of the state who went. A former 2-term El Paso County Commissioner, he's built his work around using data analytics to shape policy and real solutions for the working families of his district and across Texas. So thank you both. Rep. Bryant has been on with us before, but thank you, Rep. Perez, for coming the first time.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell our listeners, what's the purpose of this tour?
Well, we're trying to highlight issues that are important to all voters, and particularly on a high level of interest to progressive Democratic voters in Texas, immigration and public education. And without, I think, an intentional effort to get out there and bring to each community a forum for everyone to be able to come and speak their mind in these areas, these issues don't get enough attention. They just get occasional attention from the media, and not everybody's even watching the mainstream media any longer. So our effort is to get the facts out, and when we get the facts out, we win.
Rep. Perez?
Yeah, I mean, it's important to remember, Republicans set the agenda. And so when the legislative session finishes, it's the Speaker of the House, in our case, who sets the agenda for the interim hearings. So when it comes to all these important issues, whether it be higher education, healthcare, immigration, whatever issue, Republicans are the ones who are ultimately setting the tone. And this stemmed from a conversation that several of the progressive members had, and John and I were there, and we said, how can we amplify the people's voice, and how can we start to set the agenda and start to talk about the issues that are important? If we're really going to make progress in Texas, and if we're really going to, advance our agenda and have a progressive vision for Texas, well, then we need to set that tone. And that's really what these hearings are designed to do. They're designed to set the issues that are important to our communities and to give the people an opportunity to come and speak on the issues that are important.
And tell our listeners, where have you gone already and where you're headed, but also how did you pick those locations to visit?
Yeah, so I'm proud to say, El Paso was the second stop on the tour. There was one in Houston, and then El Paso, and then there was actually just one in Fort Worth this week. And the idea is to go to all corners of the state and to hear from folks from all parts of the state. And so that's really just the objective. I can tell you that, here in El Paso, it was just a phenomenal event. It was just so well attended. people have been craving this, really feeling like they are participating in their government, having this opportunity to speak directly to legislators, not just from their own community and their own district, but from around the state. It was a real treat for many of the people here in El Paso to have John, who's on the Public Education Committee, to have somebody who's actually there, they're at the forefront of this fight when we're talking about education and all the cuts that all of our communities are seeing in all of these closures. So it's just, I can't say enough about this event. I hope we grow this and replicate it every year because of its success. Everybody who participated is ultimately logged into, the final report. So everybody who signed up, everybody who testified is ultimately going to go to this final report that will be distributed among all the members of the caucus and of the Democratic caucus. And it's just great feedback for legislators as they're getting ready for the next legislative session.
Rep. Perez, I'd like to stay with you for just a second. We know in Dallas County, where I live, the Republican defunding of our public schools has led to some schools moving to a 4-day school week. And we know in Harris County, those cuts mean that school districts can't afford to bus students that they normally used to. So that means students are walking longer distances and are getting hurt. And so county commissioners are stepping in with crossings and things like that to take care of the children because of the defunding of public schools. And in other areas, it means like in Travis County, some schools have shut down. What does that look like in El Paso for your constituents?
Well, I mean, it's been terrible. I mean, there's actually here in El Paso, we have the steepest enrollment declines in the state of Texas. Part of that's driven by the birth rate, but there's also a big part of it also where there has been this deliberate underinvestment in public education. For the longest time, even this whole voucher fight that recently happened in the legislature, keep in mind, Governor Abbott was holding public education funding hostage, during COVID and for several years because he couldn't get the private school vouchers that he wanted to subsidize, these private schools.
Right.
School districts had to bear the cost. So when inflation has been skyrocketing, you've had 20 to 25% inflation, our school districts have been flat this entire time. So right there, they're having to do a lot more with a lot less. And what we're seeing now with school closures is the consequence of that policy. Couple that now where you're starting to see Republicans invest over $1 billion in private schools when our public schools aren't making it. It's a serious issue. And so it's been a deliberate underinvestment, I would say. And I feel just like now people are waking up to it, but I feel like we're at the tail end of this process.
And tell us, Rep. Bryant, who all else is going to be receiving testimony from their constituents? Who all else is a part of this tour from the Texas Legislative Progressive Caucus?
Well, the chairman of our caucus is Ana Maria Ramos from Richardson. She'll
Yes.
be at our Dallas hearing. I'm hoping Vince will be with us. Christina Morales, who's also chairman of the House Democratic Campaign Committee from Houston, will be with us. And I don't know who else may have RSVP'd from our group. Everybody can't attend every one of these hearings, but we've had a good attendance at all the others. And we invite public officials that are subject matter experts in these areas to come and be witnesses, and in some cases to participate with us in helping develop the questions. So these are substantive hearings. And it's really quite, I think, important because the only other hearings are when they're held in Austin. And then you have a lineup for everybody from a state with 31 million people. The press doesn't recover them very much. So really, they're not really an airing of the views of the cross-section of the state. They don't really address the needs that we see out here in a way that's visible to the public.
It's also important to point out, too, that to John's point, because a lot of these hearings are in Austin, we said this during our hearing, it's lobbyists who are really controlling the conversation because they're the ones that are, everybody's there in Austin, everybody's paid to be in those hearing rooms. So when there's witness testimony, you'll often see, a lot of, hired guns that come up to testify that offer hearings. A lot of it's just access because they're always there and they're paid to be there. They're paid to be there on behalf of their clients. So, this is intended to try to combat that and to, again, shift the conversation back to the people setting those priorities.
I know that the tour started in El Paso in July, then went to Houston, like you've said, and then Fort Worth now in August this week. What's coming up next is on the 12th of August, Austin, and then the 15th of August, Dallas. The tour the first time I saw it had 4 city stops, but then there were 5. Is there a possibility of adding more stops, or will this be it?
I don't know if we've had a discussion about that or not, but we're flexible. We can add as many stops as we want to. So I think we'll be inclined to keep doing this.
Sounds great. And we'll definitely update our show notes and the post for this podcast on our website to add new dates if those are added. Let's talk about some of the things that you heard about in Houston and El Paso and others. We've talked about education. What have you heard about concerning immigration enforcement, impacting job opportunities, economic opportunities, ICE detention centers, things like that?
Yes, well, here in El Paso, our focus was, we had 2, and again, it wasn't limited to that. And that's another great thing about these hearings is that, there's significant public input that's taken on other topics. But here we decided to focus on immigration and on public education. Again, those are 2, big concerns, not the only concerns. There are others that are equally as important. But, here in El Paso, we, unfortunately, it almost feels like we sometimes have been ground zero for what's happening on the immigration front. There's massive detention centers already in operation where there's been significant abuses. There's been several deaths already at these detention centers. There's already been even federal reports, that are reporting on the conditions of these facilities and the types of conditions that people have to endure in these facilities. So we just felt it was important to talk about that and to bring, continue to bring attention to that. Furthermore, the federal government tried to bring a mega detention facility here that would have been an 8,500 person detention facility. But I feel like we've been successful in combating that. The federal government's having a lot of trouble getting that off the ground. So I just wanted to make, the representatives who were here visiting, aware they have been involved in the fight. Every time it is I request assistance from them, John and others and the Democratic Caucus have been available to fight that. And again, we also talked about public education and the cuts and the closures. There was a lot of conversation about data centers, and the impact here in El Paso too. We have 3 major data centers here. Each one of them consumes more electricity than the entire city in southern New Mexico combined. And so overnight, our energy consumption is going to triple. People are very concerned about utility costs, and the impact that it's going to have on the environment, the emissions that are going to go up in the air. So those are a lot of the, the concerns that we had talked about in our session. And again, it was just so well attended. People were eager to give feedback and testimony. It was just great to hear from the public on all of these issues.
I would add, Kathleen, that people talked also about the impact on our economy of this Trump crusade to throw people out of the country. I mean, if you care about live human being customers walking in the door of your little business, he's throwing them out of the country. If you care about employees, he's throwing them out of the country. If you care about the economy, about tax collections, these folks are paying taxes. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think we're seeing a growing consensus that this entire effort has been a colossal disservice to the interest of the United States, not to mention the cruelty of it.
And what would the advantage be of having these sessions at this moment during the election cycle?
Well, I hope that we are causing people to take notice and maybe connect public policy with whether or not they go and vote, because nothing changes unless people vote. And
absolutely,
everything we're talking about here depends 100% on the outcome of elections. So I'm hoping we'll help people make that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that people are so frustrated because they feel that just government isn't responsive to them, and they feel that just government isn't serving them. And when you look at a lot of the structure, it's true. Again, when I was talking about lobbyists having the input, I will also say the reason why this is so important to have it during election season is because, as I like to tell folks, Texas isn't red because Texans love Republican policies. Republicans have worked overtime to rig the system any chance they get. We've seen this with redistricting.
Right.
As soon as now that the Voting Rights Act has been gutted, which is a major issue that we need to be talking more about, they're going to come after more districts next session because they're not even bound by the 1965 Voting Rights Act, which set the floor. Now they can go honestly and redistrict us back to the 1950s. And so it's just important that people realize we're not a red state because, again, people are supportive of Republican policies. We're in large part, we're in red states because there's a lot of Democrats in these safe districts, where we're talking about these issues, who just simply don't vote. And when you look at a lot of these Republican seats along the border, South Texas, other places, you'll notice that data-wise, That also corresponds, you'll also see the lowest participation rates among Hispanic communities, other peoples of color. So it's important that we talk about these issues. We talk about constantly the importance of getting out to vote, because that's really is what's going to turn Texas blue.
Rep. Perez, you bring up the Voting Rights Act. Today, as we record, it's the 61st anniversary of the Voting Rights Act in America. And while we're talking about hearings and talking about voting rights, I have to ask you both about what you saw in Tarrant County. I know you may not have been there, but I'm sure you both saw people come out and ask the Tarrant County Commissioners Court not to cut 45% of the voting locations for the November election, and had the county judge clear the room of what should have been a people's hearing. And then former State Representative Lon Burnham was carried out by his arms and legs for speaking truth to power. Would you both mind just reacting to that? I'm sure you both know Lon, or I'm sure you do, Rep. Bryant, and you're currently holding hearings, and you would never do something like that if someone disagreed with you. Could you both react to what happened in Tarrant County this week?
I watched it on the local news, of course, and texted with Lon after it happened. It was a ridiculous outrage, but it's a repeated outrage in Tarrant County. This extremist judge, O'Hare over there, county judge, seems to be part of the Trump movement that has abandoned basic American democratic values and devalues everybody's opinion except their preconceived notions. They don't want to hear from anybody else. The news was pretty good about showing the entire matter, and all Lon did was speak, pick up a microphone and turn around, and next thing you know, the police had him by the arms and legs. So it was ridiculous. It's almost unbelievable that you see that in the United States anywhere. I think Lon did us all a big favor by putting up with that, however, and helping to highlight what goes on daily at the Tarrant County Commissioners Court. And because it was him, it got a lot more publicity as a former state representative.
I think that's right.
Yeah, and you have a situation where these elected officials, again, Republicans have been in power now for 30 years. Once you're in power that long, I think you start, caring less about the actual needs of the constituency. And it's more, how do we figure out how to cling to power and stay in there longer? Republicans see the writing on the wall, and they see the changing demographics, and Tarrant County is ground zero for that. So keep in mind, it wasn't just yesterday, this week's decision with the voting locations. They redistricted those county commissioner districts as well, getting rid of a minority district there as well. So they are actively dismantling, like I said, this is the only way they have been able to stay in power for 30 years, is by changing the rules of the game to silence the voice of voters. That's what's happening in Tarrant County. That's what was happening with the redistricting fight this year. And again, if Republicans could redistrict us back to the 1950s, they will. And that's what they're already gearing up for. David Spiller, State Representative David Spiller, said, the removal of the Voting Rights Act is a game changer. And Republicans are salivating at this opportunity. So that's why everybody needs to act with a sense of urgency. This election cycle, we need to have a big turnout. We need to have statewide candidates, to put a stop to this agenda. And we need to win back a lot of these House seats, to make it difficult and to block these proposals. Because, if we don't succeed, Republicans are going to do all that they can, again, to take us back to the 1950s. And we got to do all that we can to stop that.
Right.
When this tour is complete, whether it's after the 5 city stops or if there's more, how will the listening sessions impact the actions and the values of your caucus?
Well, that's a good question. It can only have a positive impact, and we have so little rhetorical firepower coming from our side relative to what they have coming from their side year in and year out, that anything we do to begin to highlight these issues is critically important. People don't realize how extreme the Republican policies are that we're living under right now. Our Republican majority, which Vince pointed out, they've been in control of the executive branch for 30 years and the legislature for 20 years. It's so extreme that they turned down $10 billion a year in free Medicaid support from the federal government that would be going to relieve the pressure on our hospitals and make life a little more bearable for the poorest of our citizens. What possible justification could there be for that? And the answer really is they don't like the people that need that support. They don't want them to get that support. There's really not any other rational explanation for it. The estimate is, I think, $110 billion in federal money we could have received in the last 11 years. We've not received any more. That's just one example. We're 47th in the nation in state support for public education. We're dead last 50th in mental health. One thing after another. If you're at the top 1%, you're doing great. 62 billionaires control, or rather have more wealth than 70% of our population in Texas. That's how extreme the situation is. So we're not a bunch of radicals here. We're just trying to bring people's attention to basic, fundamental human needs.
Yeah, and again, if we're really going to enact a progressive vision for Texas, we need to build the ecosystem, right? I mean, this podcast is an important part of that, right? Legislatively, we have to do that too. If Republicans are going to set the agenda, get testimony on the issues it is that they want, well, how are we going to inform our vision? So it's important that we set the tone and we set the agenda. And that was one of the great parts about this hearing, is that we took testimony and there were actual meaningful proposals that were discussed and legislative proposals for the next session. All of the hearing was transcribed. And as I told the committee members, we're working on our committee report, where we're going to summarize and put in everybody's testimony, and that's going to be distributed among members. And that is a meaningful contribution, again, to the legislative portion of this ecosystem that we have to build.
Yes, it is.
There's other parts of it that need to be worked out. We've got to be more aggressive in, something it is that I'm working on with Representative Garcia out of Dallas, is that, we're working to own our make sure that we have the data necessary to build up these communities, to build up our communities. I think a lot of the, again, one reason why Texas has stayed red is because there's a lot of voter apathy and it suppresses turnout. And I think a lot of even the Democratic members would be surprised to learn that when they examine their own backyard, they'd be surprised that it's really their precincts and my precincts. I will tell you, it's also, which I am guilty of, they're some of the lowest performing in Texas, and that, James and Gina, aren't going to succeed if these precincts continue to perform that way. So we've got to be just methodical in growing this ecosystem, and this legislative portion was really a great example of what we can do to move forward with an agenda.
Very good. Well, I'd like to ask you both for your final thoughts to share with our statewide audience. I want to also direct our listeners to the Texas Legislative Progressive Caucus's website about the 2026 People's Hearings, and that is texaslpc.org/events will be the events page. But is there anything else that we didn't discuss about the hearings that you want to make sure our folks heard?
I mean, I'll just add is that I think a lot of people, look, there's a reckoning happening in this country, right? I mean, look at the results in Michigan right now.
That's
people
right.
are upset. And that's great. And we need to do our part, to harness this, to be sure that people, this isn't going to be a one-time thing that, people get upset and they come out to vote. We have a lot of voters in our caucus that only vote once every 4 years. That's not acceptable. That's not going to keep Texas blue, and that's not going to enact this vision. So it's not in many places, especially those where, Democrats represent. It's not a question if Democrats are going to win in November. Yeah, am I going to win? I feel good about it. I'm trying to do my best for my community. John is going to win. That's not what we should be concerned about. We should be concerned about our margins. How many votes is my district contributing to the whole? How many votes is John's district contributing to the whole? That's really what we need to be working on. So there's a lot of people I'm sure that are watching thinking, oh, we got this in November. We're going to, there's going to be big turnout. That's not what we should be worried about. It's really the margins that are going to make a difference statewide.
I really appreciate you saying that. And yes, traditionally, the bluer the district is, the lower the performance is, which is so unfortunate because I think a lot of people think that they're doing their patriotic duty to vote, and that means they vote every 4 years. And it just doesn't break through to them that their county elections matter and their local elections matter, and these statewide really matter. So I'm so pleased to hear you say that. Well, I thank you both so much for your time and for putting these people's hearings together. We'd love to have you back at the close to see what's next for the Legislative Progressive Caucus. But we so appreciate your time today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for having us.
Absolutely. Progress Texas amplifies progressive values, leaders, and actions. While campaigns come and go, we're the permanent home for progressive media and action in the Lone Star State. The months leading up to an election are often the most difficult time for nonprofits like Progress Texas to raise money, as donors naturally focus on candidates and campaigns. And we are in that peak dry summer giving for nonprofits. We need patrons of Progress to support the real free press and amplify affordability, public education, and safe communities. Folks, we're raising $60,000 to get to Election Day, and we could use your help. Invest today at progresstexas.org/donate. Find our always open union-made web store and much more at progresstexas.org. Thanks for listening, and please share this episode with a friend.